Women Making Waves.
Do you have, or have you had, when you were working in offices in the past, do you ever feel guilty if you actually leave on time? Or are you one of these people who stays much, much longer like I usually do? I'm usually involved in what I do. It's not because I feel I should stay. I'm quite into what I'm doing. And then you look up and it's 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And you're still in the office, you're still working.
Last time I was in office was quite a while ago. I've been working more at home and doing stuff. But so it really depends on the job, Linda, doesn't it? But I remember working for advertising and PR, and I couldn't wait to leave the office. So when so when 5:30 arrived, I would make sure my jobs were done by midday. So anything that came up, I had a afternoon to get it sorted. The culture was, Linda, in advertising and PR at that time was that we would go to the pub at 5:30. So no, I didn't have that thought that I had to be in the office.
So you were rushing off to the pub or to a restaurant or something like that. No. Well, I was slogging away. I really did pick the wrong jobs, didn't I, going into IT? And I worked in IT in a law firm, which is even worse because they almost locked the doors. I mean, they didn't. Of course they didn't. No. But there was this unspoken rule that, if you weren't at your desk, you weren't very keen. Somehow or other.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? And do you think that's changed now a little bit? Do you think
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope so. I think certainly in the organisation I work for at the moment, there doesn't seem to be that pressure at all. There's a few of us that still there quite late in the evening, but I think it's because we're busy. I'm pretty confident in saying it. It's not because we feel we should be there to outstay our boss. It's not like that.
Yeah. I never felt I had to outstay my boss, I have to say. 5:30 I clocked off.
Did you last long in this job, Susie? Just asking for a friend.
I did. I suppose, no, actually, what I did do more than anything else, I would come in really early in the mornings. That way I would get a lot more done because there was nobody around. There was a few moments where I spent too much time out in the evening and I go to the office early so that I could go and sleep on my boss's sofa.
You just went straight back to the office.
I did go back to bed. But then I went in early and I was getting up so early, determined to get the work done, but I fell asleep on my boss's sofa. And that was not the thing to do. And I got away with quite a lot, let's put it that way. You couldn't do that now.
Well, we're going to be talking about this later on with one of our guests, and that's Inger Anson. And she is actually the senior lawyer, or partner rather, at HCR in Cambridge. She's got some really interesting stories to tell and is very entertaining.
And then we also get to talk and meet with Alison Wright. She is the owner of Fitzbilly's Cafe in Cambridge, and what a gal she is as well. So exciting to be talking to her. Well, I suppose in many ways with Alison, she's the last one probably to leave the office, the last one to leave the cafe, isn't she? She has to.
She probably will be.
Yeah.
She'd be having to kick you out, though, with your earlier stories. If you were to go in there in the evening, she'd never get closed.
No, she wouldn't.
You're listening to Women Making Waves radio show and podcast, brought to you by Susie Thorpe and Linda Ness. This show is all about women doing extraordinary things.
We are delighted to be joined today by the owner of an iconic Cambridge business. Alison Wright owns Fitzbilly's, famed for its afternoon teas, gorgeous cakes, and of course, those world-famous Chelsea buns. But Alison hasn't always been the owner of a successful business. She studied philosophy, politics and economics at Oxford and became the marketing director for an insurance company. We're looking forward to learning lots more about you, Alison Wright. Thank you very much for joining us today on Women Making Waves.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
You were brought up in Cambridge and you spent your university days in Oxford. When you were studying there, did it ever cross your mind that you'd end up owning Fitzbilly's?
Well, absolutely not, I would say. I mean, as a kid in Cambridge, we went to Fitzbilly's. My dad was a fellow at St Catherine's, which is just sort of diagonally opposite Fitzbilly's, one of our closest colleges. So we used to get treats from Fitzbilly's on Saturdays. I cycled past it on my way to school. My 18th and 21st birthday cakes came from Fitzbilly's. So I knew it well, but at that point, I don't suppose I would ever have thought that I would end up working in bakery and hospitality. And I think I went off to university in Oxford. I think my parents moved away from Cambridge 1 or 2 years after I finished college. So actually, I quite rarely went back to Cambridge in my 20s and 30s. So I hadn't given it all much thought, really. I'd been back actually to Cambridge probably 2 or 3 years before we ended up taking on Fitzbillies. So we went there. My daughter, I guess, was 5 or 6 years old. So I'm like, oh, we have to go to Fitzbillies. We'll get a cake. But actually, it was all looking a bit sad and it had fallen on slightly hard times. So I remembered noticing that actually someone needed to sort that place out. But I didn't give it a lot more thought, really. It was really quite sudden. I was at work in London. I was at my desk. I was working as a strategy director of a marketing agency at that time. And I saw on Twitter, Stephen Fry tweeted, and I guess this was February 2011, that Fitzbillies had closed down. And unexpectedly, I was physically seized by a sense that this couldn't happen. I was sort of almost having like heart palpitations, and I had to go off to a meeting, to a conference, but I was standing outside. I rang the Cambridge News to kind of find out what was going on. And I was kind of like, who's the landlord? What's happening? How does this all work? I don't really know exactly why, but I just couldn't let this pass. It seemed so wrong and so mad.
Credit to Stephen Fry for writing something on Twitter for you to have a look at and see. Otherwise, I'm not sure if you would have done. I mean, he was probably the instigator.
It was quite by chance, really. And, a major change in my life just might not have happened if I hadn't seen that. So, yes, I do. I owe him a lot of thanks, certainly.
Obviously, you were very gutted that Fitzbillies was closing down. Have you had any experience in the cafe business or in the food industry?
So I was always a very keen baker, and in advertising and marketing, when you change jobs, you have these quite long periods of gardening leave sometimes. And I'd used some of that time and holidays to go on quite a lot of baking courses. So I was a much better than average home baker. I used to make wedding cakes, 4 and 5 tier wedding cakes for my friends. I always won the bake-off competition at work. Do you know what I mean? It was like, I think it was quite sad for everyone else when they'd bring in their little plate of cookies. And I'd be like, I've made a 5-tier cake with these 5 different flavors and this decoration and everything. So arguably, I needed an outlet. I'd also actually, when I'd been on gardening leave, found local cafes and delis and be like, I'll bake cakes for you. Because otherwise we had excess cakes at home, shall we say. So I was definitely in need of an outlet. And I'd done that thing between, I think, my previous 2 jobs of realizing that you could bake to a certain level at home, but very rapidly you get to the point where you either need to scale up or stop, shall we say. So I did love baking. But I think the other thing that made me so interested in Fitzbillies is because I'd worked in marketing. I think I was quite attuned to brands and marketing in the deep sense of understanding what people love and what they want and providing it to them. I mean, it's a great name, Fitzbillies. It's got a great logo. It's in a great position. It's got an iconic product. I was kind of like, yeah, there's something here, isn't there? So I think my combination of loving baking and loving marketing was the perfect recipe, really. I worked for anyone in Cambridge, they might remember Auntie's Tea Shop, which was on Great St Mary's Passage. I worked there in 1986 for the summer holidays. I think that was my previous experience, really, in hospitality. My husband, Tim, had worked in diners in the US. In some ways, he sees a lot of parallels with that and Fitzbillies, because diners in small towns are like the community place to go to get coffee, to eat, to meet people at all times of day. He thinks Fitzbillies is a bit like that. So he loves that aspect of it. He did also warn me that hospitality was really, really hard and hard going and not like anything I'd done before. So he knew both aspects of it.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, about Tim Hayward. So you're suddenly going, right, I'm really thinking about taking on Fitzbillies. What did he say about that? Did he think it was a great idea? Go for it, really encouraging?
Well, initially he said, "You're mad." High street bakeries are closing down all over the UK. So it was 2011. So there were still knock-on effects from 2008 sort of crash. And he just said, nah, high street bakeries are closing down everywhere. You don't want to get involved in this. And I went, but this isn't any high street, is it? It's the high street that goes between the Fitzwilliam Museum and King's College Chapel. This is a different sort of a world. Surely there's something to be done here. And to be honest, he did get behind it, and he had probably more friends and contacts who worked in the restaurant industry and that sort of thing. So we got a lot of advice from people who had run food businesses, which was very helpful to us. Although, I mean, they kind of sat us down and went, you realise it's not all cakes and icing. It's about grease traps and bins and extraction and all of this type of thing, which they were absolutely right. I would say quite a lot of the hospitality industry is about those less glamorous things. But so we got quite a lot of advice going into it.
Do you think our love of cakes and pastries in the UK is something that will live with us forever and ever?
I do think it probably will. I mean, I think sweet food, kids love it, don't they? It's a very innate thing. And I think one of the great things about bakery, you know, a restaurant meal now, if you go out to a restaurant, it's what, 60 quid a head, very frequently now. You can still go to a bakery or a coffee shop and have a really nice coffee and a really nice cake for less than £10 a head. And while that is, you know, a luxury, and unfortunately it's not affordable to anyone, there's a large percentage of the population who can choose to treat themselves in these small ways. And we're really lucky to be part of anything from perking up someone's Monday morning with a nicer than usual coffee to a birthday afternoon tea or a wedding cake. So we're just so lucky to be part of the good moments in people's lives.
I'm interested in when you started off. You've taken over this business that had failed. That must have been terrifying in itself. But, you know, it's not a small place, is it? You must have had a lot of staff to bring together as well when you started up the business. How did you go about choosing people and putting the right people in the right jobs, which you clearly have done?
So good question. How did we do that? So going back even before that, the landlords who are Pembroke College, I think they had lots of demand for the space. So they were in a position where they made a long list and then a short list. So we had to put together quite a detailed business plan with financials. And that was quite hard work at the time. But probably I was in a good position to do it. Having worked in marketing and advertising, I knew how to drive the PowerPoint, shall we say. But it made us think through everything. We had to do sample rotas, sample menus. Perhaps we kind of came to the top of the pile because we put this amount of work in. We were really lucky in, I would say, at least 3 people who joined the business very early. The first of those was a lady called Rosie Sykes, who is a brilliant chef. How did we know her? I guess we knew her from, she ran a pub in Clerkenwell in London. I guess Tim knew her through the food scene. And she came to be our first head chef and to do the savoury food. And obviously she'd run hospitality businesses before. So she helped us in all sorts of ways with what does a rota look like? What are we going to make and not make? Other brilliant luck that we had, a lady called Jill Abbs, who works for us to this day. She's our head cake baker. She's worked at Fitzbillies for 53 years with only 2 breaks for the 2 bankruptcies. The previous 2 owners have gone bankrupt, just to be highly specific and make it even more frightening. So Jill, obviously, when the business went into receivership, she, like everyone else, found herself without a job. She'd actually gone to work at another local bakery. But we heard actually through Pembroke College's agent that she wasn't really liking it there. It wasn't suiting her. And she was interested in coming for a meeting. So, of course, what I didn't know is whether Jill was part of the problem because, the cakes, when I'd had them 2 or 3 years before, were stale. The business wasn't in a good shape, or whether she was part of the solution. But to be honest, as soon as she walked through the door, and she came in while we were doing the refurbishment, just to have a sort of meeting and see where things were at. And she and I just got on so brilliantly. We just talked cake, basically, and got on really well. And we were so lucky that she wanted to come back because we didn't actually know if we'd get the original Chelsea bun recipe. So Tim and I had baked batches and batches of Chelsea buns, kind of going, have we got it quite right? Have we got the syrup right? Have we got the topping right? And we baked some really very nice buns. They weren't, I don't know, had we necessarily got them exactly bang on? But fortunately, Jill came back with all the recipes in her head. And the next piece of luck, a lady called Kirsty Chapman, who you can still find working in our cake shop to this day. I think she's done nearly every job in the business. She'd been the sort of cafe manager at Fitzbillies, I think, for about 15 years. And she was interested in coming back as well. Again, she knew what the customers were like. She knew the patterns of demand, when it would be busy, when it wouldn't be busy. She told us all sorts of things that we ought to have known. So like on the first day that we opened, it was about 3 minutes to opening time and there was a queue of people outside for Chelsea buns. And Kirsty goes, have you got the float? And I go, what's the float? And she says, it's the money you put in the till to give people change.
Yeah.
And she had told me before that we needed a float. So my dad, who wasn't very young at the time, had to run to the nearest bank and get the float. But Kirsty, from before then and ever since then, has been offering us sage advice and keeping us in touch with our customers, basically. We call her the weather vane or the sage of Trumpington Street. She can step outside the shop in the morning and go, yeah, it'll be a busy day, a bit quiet in the morning, but it'll hit around 11 o'clock. And then, if there's a bit of light rain over lunchtime, we'll really fill up. Might get a bit quiet in the early afternoon, but she's also the inventor of Scone o'clock, which is something we encounter every day. It gets a little bit quiet after lunch and you can go, oh dear, it's not very good business today. But Kirsty's like, don't worry. 3:30, 3:45, scone o'clock, and the queues appear in the door for scone jam and clotted cream. So she's our absolute expert on the patterns in the business and working with our customers and getting them what they want.
That's interesting to talk about, Kirsty, because I have been reading about that because you've said here, someone said she's a great observer of trends. Two things I want to find out here, Alison, is observing trends is really important in this day and age, making sure you are pleasing the customer, which you know more about than I do. But I really am quite interested why you think previous businesses or previous owners of Fitzbilly didn't get it right.
Yeah, so I think there's a combination of things. I think both times the business went bankrupt, it was after different family problems. So the business owners were distracted. I think latterly, distraction, lack of investment. And also, and I will say this 13 years in, it is incredibly hard work. And there are days when it is difficult. And you have to run really fast to make all the changes you need to make, especially since COVID. And there are days when it's difficult to find the energy. So I guess maybe they just didn't quite find the energy. Maybe we've been lucky to get to the scale where I can have some brilliant managers in the business around me that mean that if I'm not having a good energy day, they probably are. I think it would be really easy. You'd only have to look away for 6 months for it all to be over. I would say you've got to be on your game every week, if not every day, I would say.
Yeah, because your clients change, don't they? Your clients change. You have quite a big interesting span of customers, don't you? It's quite interesting. But the trends for me is quite interesting because coffee has become so much more popular, hasn't it, in the last 10 years?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, when we reopened Fitzbilly's, Hot Numbers in Gwydir Street had just opened, and that was really the first speciality coffee in Cambridge. And it was Tim's inspiration to use the little room on the corner as a coffee bar, basically, a coffee shop. You know, that was quite new at the time. And I suppose perhaps we shouldn't all be eating a Chelsea bun every single day, but many of our customers like to drink at least one really good coffee every day. And, you know, we have a number of customers who like 2 or 3 very good coffees every day, and those are great customers. And I think if we are always good enough for the 3 times a day customers, we will be good enough for the 3 times a month and 3 times a year and the once in a lifetime customers as well. So we really pitch to the locals. We really want to be a great local coffee shop, a great place to go for your lunch if you're in town, or take a visitor. And then if we're great for that, then the people who find us because they come to Cambridge once and they want to go to the historic place, then they'll have a great experience too.
And I've heard that you make a staggering number of Chelsea buns. Can you put a number to how many you make every year?
Oh, that's a really good question. I might have to get a calculator out. I think that historically we've said 200,000, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be more like 300,000 this year. We had our biggest ever week of Chelsea bun production. In the week before Christmas last year, we made 13,500 Chelsea buns.
Wow.
The shop was very busy, but we had our online business is quite big now. A lot of people maybe don't realise this, but we deliver gifts from Fitzbilly's, whether it's a box of Chelsea buns or a big hamper or a birthday cake in a tin all around the UK. So before Christmas, we were just posting out loads of Chelsea buns. I think last year was especially big because we've started making these bake-at-home Chelsea buns. Basically, we make the Chelsea buns and we par-bake them. So they're just nearly baked, lightly baked. And then we post them out with the syrup and you bake them for the last 7 minutes in your own oven. So they're always like beautiful, warm, fresh from the oven. And then you ladle the syrup on them. So it's like perfect, fresh from the bakery buns, but you don't have to be in Cambridge to get them. So that's been really popular as well. So, yeah, it's a lot of buns. I would estimate 300,000 this year.
You've said recently that I think cake is very democratic. What do you mean by that, Alison?
Democratic isn't quite the right word, is it? But I mean accessible to all, sort of universal, inclusive. And I think it's the thing that I said earlier about, you know, a fine dining restaurant, only a certain number of people can go to. But actually with Fitzbilly's, and I need to be careful because obviously people on very limited incomes or having hard times financially can't necessarily go to an independent cake shop or coffee shop. But many, many people can. And we get everyone from all walks of life, basically. We will have university professors in their gowns. We will have plumbers, electricians, builders who will pull up their van to come out and get sausage rolls and Chelsea buns to have for lunch wherever they're working. We'll get quite young kids who have been coming since they were little, who as soon as they're allowed, like out in town by themselves, they'll come down and get a red velvet cake or a brownie or something like that. We get a lot of new babies on their first visit out. You know, we're somewhere that parents who have been kind of locked up doing the parenting thing can come in the daytime, and it's quite welcoming and it's not loud and all of that. We have a lot of like 90th birthday parties and you get family groups, but you'll get a group of students or people coming and just having a business meeting at the back of the cafe. So we really, really do we get everyone.
What's your favourite item on the menu, Alison? Is it the Chelsea bun or something else?
So for me personally, I love a scone with jam and clotted cream. I'm an absolute cream tea advocate. I've got lots of favourites. I think our carrot cake is very exceptional. I really like the English macaroons, the big giant almond macaroons. I love almond stuff. So those would be some of my favourites. But we're actually at the moment, so we've started making lots of different flavours of buns. So obviously we're known for sometimes we now call it the original Chelsea bun, cinnamon with currants and syrup. But we now make a chocolate salted caramel bun, a blueberry cheesecake bun, a cheese and Marmite bun.
I'm very hungry now.
I love the cheese and Marmite buns. I always think in the morning I shouldn't necessarily start the day with something sweet, but the cheese and Marmite buns really speak to me.
Yeah, Alison, actually, on that point, how do you stop yourself from not eating the whole counter?
I don't know quite how I've built it up or why, but somehow when I am in the business working, it's almost not like food I would eat, if you know what I mean. So if I need to taste something, if there's a new product in, or if I look at something and I go, is that maybe a little bit overbaked or does it not look quite right? I would get it and I'd sort of cut a piece off and I'd just taste that bit. And this will surprise people, but then I'd put the rest in the bin because I've done what I need to do. But then...
Oh, that's clever.
Say I've got people coming over for dinner or something, I'll go, I won't make a pudding, I'll just get some macarons and some brownies and just like make an arrangement. And then after dinner, I'll eat them and I'll go, oh my God, our macarons are really good. We make really good brownies, don't we? Or if I have, a birthday cake for my daughter or something, I'll be like, oh yeah, our red velvet cake, that is really nice. So there is something about when I'm in my working context,
yes,
I don't really eat the food.
Is that the same for all of the people that you work with at Fitzbillies? Do they all have this sort of psyche about not eating something? So if they taste it like you, they will not eat the rest, because I would find that so hard.
Yeah, I do succumb sometimes. So I think I'm a bit worse at the bakery than in the branches. So at the branches, everything is sort of laid out and you either take it or you don't. Whereas at the bakery, there's more leftovers or something. So we make lots and lots of shortbread rounds in bags of 8. And some of them get broken. So there are plates of broken shortbread and it's so delicious. It's really buttery and it's just like a little bit salty as well. And I do succumb to the broken shortbread quite badly.
I'm glad to hear.
Other people in the team. So I think at the bakery, particularly many of the ladies are very resistant and resilient and really try not to eat the baked goods all the time because we all know it's a slippery slope. So I'm very careful. If there's a new thing and I'll go around the office or the bakery with it, I'm like, would you like to taste this or should I not offer it to you? Because there's always some people trying not to eat the baked goods. At our branches, a lot of the staff are really quite young. So they're at the age when you can eat 3 Chelsea buns a day. So the waiters or baristas or whatever, in their shift, they would always get a break and they can choose what they want for either the chefs to make or off the counter. So they'd probably have a main course and a pudding. I do see them going, yeah, I'll have a pretty hearty meal and enjoy it. But most of them are at that age when they can eat anything anyway. So yeah, I think they get the real benefit. You know, they need the energy, they need the calorific value because it's pretty hard work what they do. It's physical work, serving people or cooking or whatever.
Thank you very much. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've loved hearing the story of Fitzbillies, Alison Wright. I think it's a great story. All the best for the future. I know that you've now got two premises now, almost 3 actually, haven't you?
I would say definitely 3. So we have the original one in Trumpington Street, which is now expanded and much better. Then Bridge Street, and we opened a 3rd shop in King's Parade. at the end of last year. So we're in King's Parade, right opposite the end of King's College Chapel. So it's a really beautiful shop and cafe. So do come and visit us there.
Thank you so much. It's been brilliant, Alison.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
You're listening to Women Making Waves radio show and podcast, brought to you by Susie Thorpe and Linda Ness. This show is all about women doing extraordinary things.
We are thrilled to have Inga Anton as our guest today. Inga is a corporate partner who leads the Cambridge office and the corporate team at HCR Law, that's Harrison Clark and Rickaby's. Inga started her legal journey in 1999, initially qualifying in litigation, but quickly found her passion in the corporate sector. Inga has built a strong network despite the specialised nature of corporate law, and she firmly believes in the importance of being nice, approachable and unwavering in her support for her clients. Welcome, Inga.
Thank you, Susie.
Now, kind is a really interesting word in the world of law and business. Why make such a key description in your narrative when it comes to the world of law, Inga?
I think the key thing is that those who don't deal with lawyers very often, don't often have cause to deal with lawyers, they probably find us a little scary. So I think it is absolutely incumbent on us as lawyers to try to imagine what it would be like for us approaching somebody that, we know little about lots of people know little about what lawyers do. Perhaps sometimes, they don't see us as just ordinary people. So what I'd like to do is I like to make my clients see that I'm an ordinary person. I have all the usual bits and pieces going on in life, family, things that just happen. And, we're all the same. So once you can put clients at ease and you are kind to them, ultimately you get the best out of them and they get the best out of you. That's why it's so important to me.
I think that's a really refreshing approach, Inga, because I know that in the past, certainly in the older days, that lawyers almost set themselves up as completely the opposite. They were almost kind of like, very godlike kind of and untouchable and quite distant, actually. That was the feeling that I always had. So refreshing to hear. I believe you've been working with technology companies. How much do you need to understand about what these companies actually do on a technical level? Is that important or is it just irrelevant?
I think what's important is that you are interested in what they do. You may not understand everything about what they do. They're passionate about what they're doing and they like their lawyers to be as passionate as they are. So I may not understand it, but I certainly ask lots of questions because I'm genuinely interested in what they do. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't get as much joy out of working with the early stage technology businesses as I do. These are very, very smart young people who are all wanting to make a real difference in the world. And so they need to know that I'm interested in what they do, I'm on their side, and even if I don't understand the technicalities of it, because I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer, as long as I'm, paying attention and doing a good job for them, I think the ins and outs of the technology itself for them is secondary. They can explain that to me, and they do.
Was there a defining moment, Inga, for your motivation in studying law? What started it? Where did it all begin?
I get asked that question a lot, Susie, and the answer is always the same. And actually, for a lot of lawyers, the answer is very similar. For me, it was LA Law.
Oh, really?
I wasn't expecting that. I really was not expecting that.
I wanted the boardroom and the shoulder pads and the swagger and the heels. It just looked very... just exciting. And it really is, actually. It hasn't let me down. It's lived up to expectations. Yeah, so that's where it came from.
And you started off in litigation, I believe, but you weren't overly keen on that area. Why was that?
There's a story to this. So I had a fantastic supervisor when I qualified into litigation. She was great. And she was a very strong lady, a great teacher, really smart. And I thought, I could do this. I could be like her. Sadly, what happened was, and I did love litigation. I loved having to delve into things and trying to find arguments and drafting witness statements and claim forms. It was fascinating work. But I think what put me off going into litigation as a discipline was that I got sent to court one day as a very junior lawyer. Nobody was quite expecting there to be as many people on the other side as there were when I turned up. So it was just me. I was given some simple instructions, which was to go to a hearing and just to take a note of the various directions that the judge would give. Directions essentially are, this is how we're going to structure this litigation. These are the next steps we're going to take. So my job was just to listen and to say yes when I was asked a question and to make a note of the directions from the judge. Unfortunately, what happened was that I got rather told off by the judge for not knowing who one of my witnesses was. And he really gave me a dressing down and told me not to come back into his courtroom if I wasn't adequately prepared. So that rather put a kibosh on my litigation career, because I decided I probably wasn't cut out to do this. Going back on it now, I would do it now. I would do litigation. I've learned an awful lot. And of course, as you grow, you just get more confident in your own abilities. And so I'd have another go if I could.
Yeah, I've heard that story before, actually, of judges being really harsh on trainees or young lawyers, which is really unfair. I don't know why they get a kick out of that kind of thing. It's just not fair at all, really. I don't think. And
put some of us off going into that discipline.
Well, that's right. I mean, he certainly wasn't kind, was he? No way. Totally unlike you, Inga. That's really interesting, actually, because it could put a lot of people off, couldn't it? Careers that will be very good at, but it takes one person to put you in a different frame of mind, and you just think, that's it. But actually, it's done you good, hasn't it? It's moved you into an area that you thoroughly enjoy. So maybe it was meant to be.
I'm a firm believer in that. I think things happen for a reason, and I am not unhappy with the direction ultimately that my career took. It's been a wonderful career.
So talking about, you were mentioned that your supervisor was a great teacher. Do you think you are a great teacher when it comes to helping others in your corporate firm?
That's another good question. I don't think I could hand on heart say I'm a marvellous teacher. I am probably a little impatient. I'm a deal doer. I just like to get deals done. I am good at involving people, but when we are in the thick of trying to get transactions done, I probably just revert to, it'll just be quicker if I do.
Yes.
But I do have some wonderful people around me who are very patient and very good teachers. So I often defer to them to do the explaining and the teaching. And everybody's okay with that because we're a great team. So we all have our strengths and our weaknesses.
That's exactly how it should be.
How did you end up in Cambridge, Inga?
Another interesting story, because they're all interesting stories, these, aren't they? But I was in the West Midlands working for what was Harrison Clark then, pre the Rickaby's merger. We hit 2008, financial crisis, and I thought, now is as good a time as any to do something that I wouldn't ordinarily do because it may have impacted on my career progression. And I took 3 weeks out to go to India, and I motorcycled around India with a group of other motorcyclists, about 34 of us, for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And on that trip, I didn't know this, but I met my future husband, Paul. And Paul lived in Cambridge. I commuted for 14 months. I continued working in Worcester, but visited him at the weekends. After a while, it became unsustainable, really. I was getting too exhausted. So I moved, and that's how I came to be in Cambridge. The firm were wonderful and allowed me to work a little from home in Cambridge and a little from the office before remote working was even a thing we could all do or imagine. So yes, that's how I came to be in Cambridge back in 2009.
I'm just going to rewind a bit because you slightly you went a little bit too quickly on this fantastic motorcycling adventure. Can you just elaborate a little bit?
Well, it was one of those moments when I said we'd hit financial crisis, and I'd worked so hard for such a long time, I hadn't really taken any time out for myself. And I went to the motorcycle show at the NEC in Birmingham, and the company that were running the tour were there. And I came across them by chance, and they convinced me that this was a wonderful thing to do, and I was sold. That was it. I paid my deposit there and then. And when I turned up at Heathrow, I was absolutely petrified. I was a woman on my own about to embark on a 3-week motorcycle tour of a country I'd never been to.
Fantastic.
It was absolutely fantastic. Within 3 days of being on the trip, I met two very lovely men, Paul and Rob, who had turned up on the trip together as friends. I didn't have anybody to hang out with. I didn't have anybody to ride with. The organisers had said, really sorry, but as a woman on your own, we don't really want you riding on your own, because although you ride in convoy, gaps begin to appear between you as people stop to take photographs or whatever. And so I buddied up with Paul and Rob and spent the next 12, 13 days or so with the two guys riding through India, the most fantastic scenery up into the Himalayas, and we became very good friends, the three of us. Yes, and then Paul and I continued to be friends when we got back, and then the rest is history, as they say. We married a few years later.
That's a great story.
Fantastic.
I love that story.
Yeah.
And having been to India, the roads and the traffic, can be really, really terrifying. That must have been horrible at times in busy cities and streets.
I think it probably feels like it should be, but when you're in it and you're doing it, you have no choice but to just do it. And you're absolutely right. At points there are no roads. You are riding through small rivers on your bike. You are riding through landslides, mud up to your knees. You are overtaking a bus that's overtaking a lorry. There are animals everywhere. I think in one day I fell off 5 times.
Wow.
Because I was just exhausted. We'd done 6 hours of riding in very, very difficult and challenging terrain. Yes, I got onto the road as we were heading into the village where we were staying for the night. And on the road, I fell off 5 times just from exhaustion. But it was fantastic. I'd do it again.
Inga, that's another side to you. This is wonderful. It really is wonderful.
That's a great story. So back to the law and back to Cambridge.
Oh gosh, no! Really, we've got to go back to law. I'm really quite
India.
Yeah, let's go back to India. No. Let's go back to law.
When you get involved with startups, do you ever sit there and wish that you yourself could get involved in some of the businesses and some of the startup businesses? Do you ever get kind of quite excited about them?
I do, but I think I'm very happy that I've actually done this myself. So I know challenges that they face. When I started in Cambridge, it was just me, and I had to grow that team. I know the journey. I'm not sure I'd want to do it again. And I think there are so many different things that people are doing nowadays. The one thing that perhaps if I had my time again, I would love to be able to do, as many young people do now, is it's just the choice. It is just such a range of things that people can do. Whereas when I was growing up, it pretty much still was an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, a banker, all the usual. And now I think young people have this amazing choice of things that they can choose to do. So, yes, if I were young again, I'd absolutely do what these young people are doing. And I am completely in awe of them. You have people in their early 20s who are raising millions of pounds from investors, and they just seem to take it all in their stride and get on with it. So, yes, if I had my time again, absolutely, Linda, I'd want to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
Talking of men and women in law, do you think it's an accepted view that men and women think very differently in law, Inga? Or is there a blurred line now when it comes to working together and perspectives?
I think it's probably changed over the course of my career. Certainly, there were probably more men in the profession when I qualified, but I don't think that's the case now. In our corporate team, the women probably outnumber the men in the team, which is quite unusual. Yeah. And most of those women are mothers. So they do bring a very different perspective to it. It's not to say one is any better than the other, but I think we have lots of ladies who just have a very much less adversarial approach, if I can say, towards the way that they negotiate transactions. It may help, but I think it certainly suits a certain type of client. But that's not to say that it will suit all clients. I think that women perhaps are, certainly in the law, probably still hide, their lights a little, are not perhaps as forthcoming as some of their male counterparts. But I think that's also changing. And, what I've seen over the years is that women who are returning from maternity leave are doing that on a much more confident and assured basis, which is really good to see.
Yeah, and nice that they can feel they can have children.
Yes.
And take time off and then go back again, because I know in the past, if you had 6 months off, that was about as much as you could possibly risk if you were going back into the profession, I think. And I think it has changed now, and people are taking a year off. I think firms are becoming much more flexible in the way that they approach, and with paternity leave as well as maternity leave. I think things are getting better, I think, or I hope anyway.
No, I think that's right, Linda. It's nowadays, it is, well, that's what we do. It is very accepted. And as I say, we have in the corporate team, probably at least half of our partners are mothers.
Yeah.
Who had their children, certainly whilst they were with HCR. We like to think that we try really hard to accommodate that, including things like having kit days, these keep in touch days for new mothers who are returning, so that they can come into the office before they're due to start back, say hello to their colleagues, catch up with their supervisors. How are they feeling about the possible return to work? Having a nursing room, for example, that's something else that we are now all beginning to get used to and all need to have. But of course, yes, when I was a younger lawyer, those things weren't done, and we probably didn't even imagine that they would ever come about. So lots of change for the good.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
How do you cope with life and work? Because you have a family as well, Inga. How does that all bounce around? And I say bounce around because I always think that's what we do. We bounce from place to place.
You're absolutely right. I was talking to one of my fellow partners today who is a single mum of 2 boys. And we were giggling about the fact that she would be going to watch her son playing cricket with her laptop and her paperwork, and whilst lots of the other mums were cheering on their children and having a great day, she'd be trying to do that over the top of her laptop, and at the end of her day, her son would go, "Mum, you weren't here." But I was there, and that's what matters. And what I said to her, it's absolutely right, but what we must never do is feel guilty about that. I always want my daughter to look back and think, maybe Mum wasn't at everything that I wanted her to be at, but ultimately she's inspired me to do the things that I think I can do. And that, I worked hard, and all the time that I could have spent with her, I did, and we had really, great quality time together. So I'm not always there. My husband, Paul, is very hands-on. He is the principal carer, and he does a fantastic job of looking after her and, frankly, looking after me as well, because it is a busy life, and I simply don't have time to do all the things that perhaps I'd like to do. So I'm very fortunate to have a very supportive family, and I absolutely try not to feel too awful about the things that I can't do, and make sure that I'm doing the things that I can do, and I'm happy about that.
It's so important, isn't it, to think that, and not to keep thinking that we can be perfect and everything should be placed. You made me laugh about your friend taking the laptop, because I was accused by my own son for talking too much to other mums while watching the sports thing. So I didn't even have a laptop. I was just gassing too much, and I felt like a little bit guilty that I should have been watching my son's rugby match. But at that stage, I really didn't understand the rules, and so I just turned up for the sake of turning up. But I got accused of talking too much, so I know that feeling.
And it's probably quite scary watching a boy playing rugby.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely, yeah.
I was the same, and I used to be constantly be in my phone when I was at things, pacing around in the background. Because something would always go wrong back in the office, and it would always be when you were at a sports day or something like that. We weren't taking laptops then, but there was the dreaded mobile phone. You were constantly looking at that. And I was going to ask you about that very thing as well, because lawyers are traditionally seen as people who have to work really long hours, and I'm assuming that is still the case, that people are in the office till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night frequently.
They can be. Certainly in corporate work, deals are fast and furious, and if they're happening and they're coming to a conclusion, then you just have
to be
going.
There. Yeah.
But we do try hard not to have a culture of presenteeism. I don't want my colleagues to be in the office for the sake of being in the office.
Yep.
And we work really well as a team with remote working and making sure that people can do the things that are important to them, because that's what keeps them happy. That's what keeps them motivated. So yes, when I was younger, about a younger lawyer, it was very much still a presenteeist if that's the right word, culture.
Yeah.
And you had to be seen to be in the office.
Yep.
But it's not so much the case nowadays. We do work hard, but at least we can do that from nicer places like the back garden in the sun.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really glad to hear that, actually, because it used to be if you went home at 5 or 6 o'clock, even if you'd been in early, there was a certain feeling that you weren't quite pulling your weight. You had to kind of be there to quietly, horrible.
Inga, if you were able to talk, I'm sure you do this. You do a lot of sort of motivational talks, perhaps, to younger generations. I think you do. I think you do go to universities and colleges. Am I right?
What we do, actually, Susie, is we send our younger lawyers in to the universities because they're much more relatable. And then what I would do is when we take in a new cohort of work experience or trainees, we will have a welcome day on their first day, and I'll chat to them about what it means to be a lawyer. Yes, we talk to them, we tell them what it's like, we tell them what to expect, and we tell them that if they genuinely love the law and they are genuinely inquisitive about the law and life, they will have a great time.
Absolutely.
And is there still quite a big intake of trainees coming through the ranks? I know it used to be quite hard to get into firms when you were coming out of university. People are still interested in doing law, I'm assuming.
They really are. But you're right. When I applied, I think I made something like 87 applications.
Wow.
I don't know if it's that hard now, but we certainly do take a lot of trainees, and we still have a good number of very high quality applications. So there is still genuinely an interest in doing it, and there is still a very vibrant profession. It will change, I think, as AI becomes more and more a part of what we do, but still people very, very much wanting to do it as a profession. Maybe the one thing that will change is people will no longer have lifetime professions. But for now, I think when it comes to the law, they still do.
You've said two really interesting things there, actually, to unpack. One is the AI side. Do you think that's a danger, that people will start going, I don't need lawyers anymore. I can, just go on to ChatGPT and rustle up a document that way, which sounds quite dangerous to me, to be honest. And that the quality of lawyers coming through, there might be a danger. Just this morning on the news, we were talking about a test that they'd run from one of the universities where they had, I think it was 33 papers put through where they'd used ChatGPT, and most of the markers didn't spot that, and not only that, but gave them quite high marks. Is that a danger as well?
Yes. Well, I think how people come through the education process and into the career is something that they're going to have to think very carefully about. I'm not worried about it. I think that ultimately it will be a force for good. I think that the process for learning and what you need to know will change. I think it's still a very fairly old-fashioned process getting through law school. And I think that because the way that we will do our jobs is likely to change, I think that'll drive a change in how people are taught to do the job. What I mean by that is the AI will give access to the law to so many more people. I really don't mind that people will be able to ask ChatGPT a quick legal question, because for many, they would never telephone a lawyer. They would probably not be able to afford a lawyer. So if they can have access very easily to that online, then I think that can only be a good thing. Lawyers will be there to do the quality work, like the sort of work that I do. But, the AI will change how we do that job. I won't be researching things probably as much as I do anymore. I won't be drafting quite as much of the mundane stuff that we do anymore. But for me, it will be about, where is the value that I can give to this transaction? It's the human knowledge and the human thinking that will paid for. Mm-hmm. It won't be what we're doing right now.
And of course, the other thing that you said that caught my imagination was that maybe people won't have jobs for life anymore. That's a really interesting thing, isn't it? It's a great idea that you could maybe do 10, 15 years as one thing and then just completely rethink, because it's when you're in your 30s that you potentially might have that moment. Actually, it's a great idea to think that you might not be stuck, that you can actually just change and do something else.
Wouldn't it just be fantastic? The number of times I've thought, Oh, I'd love to make hats. When I retire, I'm going to do, is it millinery?
That's right.
I'm going to go and do that. And there are all sorts of other things that I want to do, but I'm going to have probably a much shorter period of time to cram all of these things in. We're earning a good salary. Yeah. We're all trying to get onto the housing ladder. Yeah. But we all want those things.
Yeah, but in some ways it's a good trap because you enjoy it. So I take it as a positive. So it's brilliant. Honestly, Inga, that's been fantastic to talk to you today.
It really has.
Really interesting and very enlightening in the sense that we've learnt a lot, and I hope our listeners will too.
Great stories.
Yeah, great stories. Love it. Inga, thank you very much for joining us here on Women Making Waves.
Thank you both.
That's all we have time for today on Women Making Waves. Our thanks go to our guests, Alison Wright and Inga Anson. We're always on the lookout to feature women living extraordinary lives, so please do contact us if you know someone we should be talking to.
You can contact us via social media on X and Facebook at WomenMW or on Instagram at Women Making Waves. You can also find us on cambridge105.co.uk or visit our website womenmakingwaves.co.uk, where you can hear all of our interviews.